Welcome to the section in your course on cooking with greens. We will be looking at how to prepare lovely greens like these in the kitchen with Mark Ferrante, making some kale chips and sauteing greens. So that will be very educational on how to make these greens really yummy. And of course, they're very nutritious because they have a low calorie, and also they're full of minerals that really help control blood pressure. And the minerals we're talking about are magnesium, potassium, and calcium. So we'll look at the amount of those minerals that are in these greens when we get in the kitchen with Mark Ferrante. But first, let's do a little recap of where we've been with all these minerals so far. We've just talked about sodium so far, and what we talked about was that you want to have your sodium about 1,500 milligrams a day. And most Americans are way over that, at least 3 times that amount. So most of us are somewhere around here, and this is where we need to be. And it's not just the salt shaker. In fact, the salt shaker is a small component of where we're getting the sodium in our diet. Okay, so that's one of the minerals, is the sodium. So today we're looking at magnesium and potassium and calcium in the diet, and particularly just in vegetables. Later on, we'll have a segment looking at calcium in other foods like soy. But right now, we're just looking at vegetables and fruits. So in front of me here, I have a display of some foods that are really high in potassium. Beans, extremely high. Half a cup of cooked beans, most cooked beans, is about 500 milligrams of potassium. A banana, about 400 to 500 milligrams of potassium. Having a banana a day is a great idea. Having beans every day is a great idea. And later on in the course, we're going to look at how to make beans more digestive friendly so that you can feel comfortable having them every day. Other things on the plate are kiwis and avocados, and potatoes are very high. And this is just a small sample of high potassium foods, certainly not complete sample. And so let's look at how much potassium do you need every day to really get that blood pressure down. This would be an example of a day where you had the amount of potassium that's recommended. So we have pistachios, about a half a cup of pistachios, 1 potato, 1/3 cup of raisins, 1 avocado, and 1 banana. And so that throughout the day would provide you 4,700 milligrams of potassium. Actually, more than that. But 4,700 milligrams is what you're shooting for. So if this is your day, you met your goal and actually exceeded it. So a recap, what amount of minerals do we need? We need about 1,500 milligrams of sodium, and we need about 4,700 milligrams of potassium. Somewhere around a 1-to-3 ratio is good to kind of think about it that way. For every 1 part sodium, 3 parts potassium. Why? Well, studies show if you do this, that you can get off of your blood pressure medication. And if you also just focused on potassium, there's some studies that show, as referenced in your book and elsewhere in this course, that if you just focus on the potassium part, you can cut your medication dose in half within 4 weeks. So that's very empowering for you, that you can use food as your medicine. Okay, so that's the potassium story. Recap of the sodium story. Now let's look at magnesium. Oh, one last thing I want to share with you about potassium to be careful about. A little bit of cautionary stories. If it's a processed food, for example, potatoes processed, the processing, it's not the heating, it's actually the way that they chemically process the food product removes potassium. So almost every processed food is very low in potassium. Almost all fast food has really depleted that original food product from its potassium. In fact, this is a 6-part sodium to 1 part potassium product here, versus a natural potato is more of a 1 part sodium to 6 part potassium product. So you definitely want to go with the natural, not the processed food when it comes to potassium. Okay. Oh, one last thing about potassium. Cautionary tale again. Taking a supplement, not the same effect, because a supplement has potassium connected to chloride. And potassium chloride does not act the same way as the potassium in natural food. And it's really what happens at the cellular level with ionic exchange between sodium and potassium. And if you really want to know all that sciencey stuff, it's very well discussed in your book and elsewhere in this course. But just remember, a supplement is not the same. It's not the same chemical structure, and it doesn't help lower that blood pressure like food potassium does. Now, magnesium, if you take a magnesium supplement, actually you might get similar benefits from a magnesium supplement like you would get from food. But I personally am always a food first person. I would rather eat my medicine than take a pill. So here's an example of magnesium foods. So how much magnesium do you need a day? Well, you need somewhere around 300 to 400 milligrams. For women, it's 320 milligrams a day, and for men, it's 420 milligrams. And so here's again a sample of high magnesium foods, and greens are particularly high in magnesium, so we'll be really looking at that today. But here what I have these adzuki beans, which are actually really high in magnesium, extremely high in potassium. Just a cup of cooked adzuki beans is actually 2,500 milligrams of potassium and 120 milligrams of magnesium. So I have adzuki beans, I have almonds, very high in magnesium, spinach, very high in magnesium, and wonderful story here, cocoa powder. Cocoa powder is extremely high in magnesium. So here I have a quarter a cup, and it has about 107 milligrams of magnesium. So you could make that with a delicious hot cocoa with real 100% cocoa powder. And that would be a great, actually, blood pressure lowering food. Now, let's talk a little bit about magnesium and tea and coffee. So a little bit of a mixed message when it comes to magnesium and tea and coffee. Tea and coffee actually do have some magnesium in them, about 7 milligrams of magnesium in a serving. So you're shooting for 320 to 420 milligrams. 7's really not a huge amount. I know the book kind of makes it sound like it is, but I would be cautious about saying that because, again, 7 milligrams in a serving is really not a big amount. And then the flip side is caffeine. If you have more than 2 servings a day of caffeine, and that's kind of your normal habit, caffeine actually depletes the body of magnesium. It makes your kidneys excrete more magnesium. So I personally feel that to really get effective blood pressure control, cutting back on the caffeine is actually very important. And when I say cutting back, I mean no more than 2 servings a day. So 2 cups of coffee. Tea is much less caffeine, so maybe 3 or 4 cups of tea, depending on how long you let it really seep and extract that caffeine into your water. So, okay, I think that covers the minerals. Again, these foods also, many of them have high calcium in them, and as well, especially the greens. So when we get to the greens, we'll talk maybe a little bit more about that, but we certainly will talk more in this course about calcium when we get to the soy story. So, all right, thanks for joining me here, and I look forward to seeing you in the kitchen.